Shabbat Shalom. Happy Sabbath. This morning, our subject is the oration and ovation of Stephanos. The oration and ovation of Stephanos. As you well know, that Stephanos, we often anglicize to mean Stephen, gave an oration to the Sanhedrin, he having been charged with sedition. And so we want to look at that this morning within the context of how we give kavod, we give glory to Yah, and also how we as witnesses demonstrate to the world what the kingdom is like. The call to us to be witnesses is a significant part of our duty. Yeshua came and made it known that his kingdom is not of this world. Yet, we are citizens of that kingdom. He's saying to us, my kingdom is invisible at this time. You who are my witnesses, you then should make it visible to those who cannot see it. My kingdom is invisible, says Yeshua. We who are witnesses are called to make that invisible kingdom visible by way of how we conduct ourselves. And so we are witnesses. So join me in the book of Mese, that's the book of Acts, chapter 17. Acts chapter 17. And it reads thus: And having passed through Amphipolis and Apolliano, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a congregation. There was a synagogue of the Yehudim, of the Jews. And according to his practice, Shaul, that's Paul, went in unto them, and for 3 consecutive Sabbaths, that's Sabbath, was reasoning with them from the scriptures, explaining and pointing out that Amashiach had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and that this is the Amashiach, Yeshua, whom I proclaim to you. And some of them believed, and a large number of the worshiping Yahwehnites, that's the Greeks, and not a few of the leading women joined Shaul and Sila, but the Yehudim, the Jews, who did not believe, having become envious, took some of the wicked men from the marketplace, and gathering a mob, disturbed all the city, and came upon the house of Jason, that's Jason, and were seeking to bring them out to the people. But not finding them, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers to the city rulers, crying out, "They who have turned the world upside down have come here too. They who have turned the world upside down, they have come here too." Our subject is the oration and ovation of Stephanos. The word says that the apostles, all they did was to preach the word of Yah and to teach the word of Yah. And it would disturb the comforted. And they sought to apprehend them for preaching the word. They said, these men are turning the world upside down by what they preach and what they teach to the people. And we can't have that. The word said they called on the house of Jason, and accusing him of harboring them, that these men are turning the place upside down. You know, it is interesting that we read that when Adam was made, he was made upright. But subsequent to the fall, all men were born upside down, because we're made to understand that the birth of a child, it's the head that comes out first. So all of us are born upside down. And these men who come with the word are teaching us how to live the right way up. And so when we talk about turning the world upside down, I'm simply saying we are teaching you how to walk the right way up. But these men, they meant that these men were seditious. On January the 6th, some years ago, you remember, as we spoke this morning, there were some men who allied themselves with the then president and went to the Capitol, and it is said that they stormed the Capitol. And we watched with glazed eyes on TV of what transpired on that day. How politicians were hiding, afraid, because citizens were seditious. It is the same kind of sedition that they ascribed to Paul and Silas, saying they were turning the place upside down simply by teaching that which Yah said they ought to preach. And sometimes in our own experiences, when we speak to people of other persuasion, you almost get the impression sometimes that we are turning their theology upside down. Their world are being troubled by what we teach. When we tell them that Yeshua was not crucified on Friday, but he was crucified on Wednesday, their theology is turned upside down. When we tell them that there were 2 Sabbaths in the week that Yeshua was crucified, one a weekly Sabbath and another an annual Sabbath, and in John chapter 19 and verse 31, John makes it clear that this was a high day meaning it was a Sabbath day, an annual Sabbath. Their world is turned upside down. And all we're doing is being steadfast to the apostles' doctrine. When we tell them that the feast days are to be kept, as prescribed in Leviticus chapter 23, they said it's done away with. Their world is turned upside down. When we tell them that the 7th-day Sabbath is the first of those feast days, their world is turned upside down. When we tell them that there is a book of the covenant and a book of the law, and the two are distinct, according to Deuteronomy chapter 31 and verse 26, it says the Levitical law were placed outside of the ark, whereas the 10 Commandments were placed inside. Their world is turned upside down. When we tell them that Yeshua was crucified on a tree and not on a cross, that the patibulum that he carried across his shoulder, that's the cross beam that was nailed on a tree, and that the patibulum itself was not a cross, but a cross beam. Their world is turned upside down. So all you have to do is to be different from the mainstream and speak something that is true, as those who are in Jason's house. So the idea of not liking house church is not a modern thing. It has its history way back in the days of the Apostle Paul. These men, they're turning the place upside down. It says Paul, 3 Sabbaths consecutively, went in and gave orations to them and taught them that this Amashiach, this Yeshua, whom I present to you, he is the one. It says some of the people believed and some did not believe. That's Paul's oration. Turn with me to chapter 12 of the same book, may say, that's the book of Acts. The word here says, and about that time, Herodes, that's Herod, the sovereign, put forth his hands to do evil to some from the assembly. And he killed Jacob, the brother of Johanan, with his sword. That Jacob in your Bible, it says James. But we have no intention to anglicize the names. So we want to call them by their proper name. And seeing that it was pleasing to the Yehudim, that's the Jews, he proceeded further to arrest Kepha, that's Peter, as well. And they were the days of matzah, that's Passover. He was doing this during the time of Passover. Herod was killing the apostles because of their oration. Yeshua had told them, "Go ye forth and teach all nations what I've commanded you, baptizing them in the name." Baptize them in Yeshua's name. And when they heard their oration, they killed them. And Kepha was placed in prison. But the word says that while Kepha was in prison, an angel came and opened up the prison. Even as the word of Yah here is coming into your hearing, the intent of which is to open the prison of misunderstanding and to open the prison of disobedience, to open the prison of unbelief, and let its inmates out so that we can lock them in the prison of love, in the prison of truth, in the prison of Yah's grace. The word says that night, Peter was sandwiched between the soldiers. And the gates were opened. Peter believing that he was in vision. It was only when he got outside of prison that he realized that this was real. Many of us, we've been to other churches. We've been out of places and we've heard the word. But when somebody comes to you and tells you that there were 2 Sabbaths in 1 week, that's a parole from false teaching. That's a release from the prison that you were in. When someone comes to you and say his name is Yeshua HaMashiach and not Jesus, knowing that there had not been any J in the alphabet, that's a release from your prison. And so Peter walked out, knocked on the door. Rhoda comes to the door. And she could not believe it. She was struck to see Peter. Oh, yes. And the word says, join me at verse 20, please. Now Herodes had been highly displeased with the people of Tyre and Sidon. Now, Tyre and Sidon, as you know, is today's Lebanon. And since the days of King Solomon, there had been a trading agreement between Lebanon and Israel. So by this time, it was about 1,000 years strong when Herod was in power. When Solomon was building the temple, he sent to Lebanon and asked for the best cedars. He wanted the best wood to build the temple for Yah. But it says here that Herod was most displeased with the people of Sidon, Tyre and Sidon. But in one mind they came to him, and having made Blastus the sovereign's eunuch, this is the chamberlain. They made friends with the king's chamberlain and asked him to speak to the king. Because what the king had done, Israel was providing grain for the people of Lebanon. And so he wanted to punish them. We cannot be sure what precipitated the stopping of the issuing of grain to them, but he says the king was displeased. So they came to speak to him. He said, because their country was supplied with food by the sovereign. Israel was giving them food. And on an appointed day, Herod, having put on his royal clothes, he did what? He put on his royal clothes, sat on his throne, and gave an oration. He gave an address. Here again, we're dealing with the oration and ovation of Stephanos, but we're looking at other people who have given orations. Now, to understand all of this contextually, we're dealing here with Herod Antipas. This is the man who shuffled his political cards, and he would shove Yeshua to Pilate, and Pilate would shove him back to him, and they decided in one voice to crucify him. This is the Antipas that we're dealing with. Josephus, the Hebrew historian, tells us that on this particular day, which was the 1st of August, it's an annual event where they would celebrate the establishment of Caesarea Philippi on the 1st of August. It was on that day. And on such day, they would call it the Lord's Day. Why? Because sometimes the people were asked to recant their faith. And all they were asked to do is to say, Kaiser Curious. And all this happened also during the course of the Reformation, asking the people to say Kaiser Curious, meaning Caesar is Lord. It was on this day. And so Josephus tells us that on this day, the king did not wear his normal robe. He wore a robe in pure silver, stitched in pure silver. And it was in the morning. So when the sunlight of the morning shone on the silver robe that he wore, it dazzled the eyes of the people. And as he gave his oration, the people said, "This is the voice of God." Shall we read it again? It says in verse 21 of chapter 12, "And on an appointed day, Herodes," you remember him, don't you? You remember Salome? You remember the woman who danced for John the Baptist's head? This is the same man we're dealing with, who took his brother's wife. This is he. It says, on that day, Herodias put on the royal clothes, sat on his throne, and gave an address, an oration to them. And the people kept shouting, "The voice of a mighty one and not of a man." They said, "This is the voice of a God." And instantly, says the word, a messenger of Yahweh smote him, because he did not give the esteem, he did not give the kavod, he did not give the glory to Elohim. And becoming worm-eaten, he died. Josephus says he went home and he was in bed for 5 days and he suffered and then he died. That's the historical context of it. He died because his oration was about himself and not of the Creator who gave him life. So this morning, as we discuss how we ought to present ourselves before Yah, that we ought to see ourselves as miniature tabernacles and temples as we come before him, and that we ought to give kavod to him, not only in speech, but by the way we dress, how we conduct ourselves. Because when he told Moses, "Build me a sanctuary," the intent was not only to give Moses a glimpse into the heavens, to give him a view of the unseen that no one else has seen, but that we would replicate that, and we would be the people who would let other people see that which is unseen. And so, do we feel that we're doing that? How distinct, may I ask, has been your contribution to the building of Yah's temple? Have I embarrassed the kingdom in any way? Have you? What will the angels write of us? Will any of us be even as Herod here? We sit and we see this all around in election season. Politicians and leaders, they stand on their pulpit and they speak of themselves in their robes. And like Herod, the people cry out. And the people say, "Yes, this is the man." And then Yah said, "This is not the man." And the word says, they give glory to themselves, but not the kavod to Yah. And he died. He died. The king died. And many kings have died since who have not given kavod to Yah. Oh, yes, they're orators. They're great orators, poets. They give fine speeches. And the people are rallied by their voices. They imitate them. And they will sing, "We're going to make this country great again." And you hear them, "Make this country great again." And the question is, why not the kingdom great? Why should we not make the kingdom great? Because our focus is on the outside and not on the inside. That's why. Because we're naturally selfish people. And the word of Yah is teaching us that ever since that rascal, Lucifer, sinned, We read in Revelation chapter 12, starting at verse 7, and he said, and there was war in heaven. Michael and his angel fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angel and prevailed not, neither was there place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth. He did what? He deceived how many people? The whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels cast out with him. In that veil of sadness, the elegant peace in the celestial realm was now disturbed as the cherub, the seraph, and the tutelary angels were consumed by shock, propelled into unspeakable fear. Therein, the gloomy ambience of war was still in grief. Even today, even as we look into Gaza, the ambience of grief is there. These are the consequences of what happened back then when Satan was thrown out. And we still read that 1/3 of the angels, though great minds, came down. They fell with him. And they are the ones now filling men with great potentials of evil. And so they speak of themselves, the great speeches they give, in rebellion against the government of Yah. That's what they're doing. And we just read how publicly the juvenile Herod was apprehended. We read it. And so the incident that landed this juvenile, even as Satan was apprehended and thrown out, we're here reading it. In fact, Luke tells us in chapter 10 in verse 18, Yeshua said, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. Now, if you align yourself with Satan, you can only fall too, because he fell. So the expulsion of Satan from heaven has altered the demographics of earth, wherein the spirit seeks to influence the affairs of men. In politics, you hear them talk about the demographics. It was long since altered by Satan. And so this morning, we're in search for a man we call Stephanos. The Oration and Ovation of Stephanos. Come with me to the book of Acts, chapter 6. Let's start at verse 11. Then they instigated men to say, we have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moshe and Elohim. This is the deacon we call Stephen. His name is Stephanos. The word says he's a man filled with the Ruach, the Holy Spirit. But when your oration is good and righteous, there are always people seeking to put you down. And it was no different here 2,000 years ago with Stephanos. It says they instigated, it was orchestrated to say we have heard him speak blasphemous word against Moshe and Elohim. Are you with me? And they stirred up the people and the elders and the scribes so they would come up upon him, seized him, and brought him to the council. And they presented false witnesses. They gave orations that were false, who said, "This man does not cease to speak blasphemous words against the Mikdash and the Torah. For we have heard him saying that this Yeshua of Nazareth shall overthrow this place and change the institutes which Moshe delivered unto us." We've heard him say that. Truth have always been an offense to delinquent ears, always, throughout time. When people hear the truth, they coil backwards. They don't want to hear it. And so it is here, Stephanos is giving his oration, and they're saying, having hired false witnesses to testify against him, that he speaks blasphemy. And so they're charging him with sedition. That's his charge. And verse 15 says, "And all who sat in the council," this is the Sanhedrin, these are the leaders of Israel, "all who sat in the council looking steadfastly at him saw his face was like the face of an angel." Did you hear that? They looked at him, and the man is giving his oration. He's giving his speech. And when they looked at him, they saw the face of an angel, but they still charged him with sedition. Wow. People have come around us and they've heard the truth. And when they hear some of the things that we have said, they've dismissed it. Sanctify them, yeah, by thy truth. Thy word is true. So chapter 7 now picks up the theme. And the Cohen Agadal, that's the high priest. The Cohen Agadal said, "Is this so?" He's saying, "Stephanos, I've heard the accusations. I've heard what they've said about you. You're preaching a Yeshua which is contrary to what the people want. In fact, you are doing something that is unlawful, like Herod. They say we only have one king, and that king is Caesar. Now to come and preach and teach the people that there is another king, they're saying he is a pretender and a challenge to imperial Rome. You can't do that, Stephen. Stephanos, you can't do that. There is one king, they say, and that king is Caesar. You cannot challenge imperial Rome. Pilate wrote an inscription saying, "King of the Jews." They asked him, so you're a king then, are you? Yeshua said, well, who asked you to ask me that question? You say I am. For that very reason was I born and sent into this world to be king. They say, we need not hear anything more. This man is seditious. That's why they crucified him. And so after that, Stephen comes with the same theme and he's telling the people, and so he too is charged with sedition. So the priest, the Cohen Agadal, said, I heard all this. Tell me, is this so? And he replied, so he's been called now, given an opportunity to present his oration. Now, it is quite strange because it doesn't sound like a defense. Stephen here is not defending himself. Sometimes we go through great length to defend ourselves. Are you with me? Let me say it another way. You never see another animal defending a lion. The lion is king of the jungle. The word is like a lion. He'll defend himself. Doesn't need any defense. So he's called the word, and he's also called the lion of the tribe of Yehudah. He's defend himself. So Stephen doesn't bother to make a case for himself. Listen to him. And he replied, men, brothers, and fathers, listen, the Elohim of esteem appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Aram before he dwelt in Haran. Did you hear me? I want you to follow this because we're listening to the oration here of Stephanos. Listen to how he begins his oration. Because what is he charged with? Understand, he's charged with attacking the temple and Moses. So as you read, Stephanos is saying, you men have made the temple a special place when your hearts are not even housing Yah. So he starts out by saying, when Yah called Abraham, Abraham was in Babylon before the temple. Understand that. When Yah called Moses, there was no temple. And many of the people Yah called, there was no temple. So don't come and make the temple a special place when you're not doing what the temple requires you to do. And today many people make their church, hear me, make their church a place that if you don't go there, you can't even pray. I wonder what they do at home. And said to him, Yah said, come out of your land and from your relatives and come here into the land that I shall show you. That's what Yah said to Abraham. I hope you haven't missed it. Yah said to Abraham, leave where you were born. Leave your relatives. The Bible says Abraham brought his father with him. That's not what the word says. He said, leave your relatives. That's why he stayed in Aram until his father died. And he never got the call again until his father died, because he brought his father with him. And the word said, leave your relatives. Stephen wants you to know that when he got the call, there was no temple. Then he came out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran, and from there after the death of his father, he removed him to this, the land in which you now dwell. Sometimes that walk to the promised land is a lonely walk, wherein relatives and friends, they will restrain you and have you stopped halfway through that journey. Abraham, leave everybody and come. Stephen is trying to make the point that when Yah calls you, he's not calling you to a place, he's calling you to a person. Moses was at the burning bush, and he was told to take his shoes off. There was no temple there. And he's making all this point. And they understand what he's saying. And in speaking, they're getting angry. That's why some people today cannot leave the errors in their church, because they think the church is a building, a place where you have to be. Stephanos is making the point. No! All those children of Israel were in Egypt. There was no temple there. And Yah called them out and spoke to them at Mount Sinai. There was no temple at Mount Sinai. Verse 5, and he gave him no inheritance in it, not a foot of it. You know, the only place that Abraham got in there was the place where he bought and buried, the burial spot. That's all he got. Because he was looking for another place that is not built with hands. But today, we make institutions we call church to be the only place that you can go for service. That's not what Stephanos is saying. Stephanos is saying, before all of you got here, Yah called men our fathers wherever they were. Now understand something else. Notice how Yah told Moshe, that the tabernacle was to be built. The tabernacle was able to be folded up and transported wherever Yah went, the tabernacle would go. Because Yah was on the move. At that time, the message was a movement. But when Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem, it became a monument. That's what Stephen is trying to tell you. The gospel is a movement, not a monument. And we have made it a monument by way of the institution that we've called the church. It's no longer on the move. And that's why you can only go a certain place to worship, because you think that's the only place that where Yah. So you put Yah in a box. You remember when Solomon built the temple? Solomon said, this cannot contain you. We cannot hold you in this place. Because heaven is your throne and the earth is your footstool. And you say that Yah is here. And you come on a Sabbath or a Sunday, whenever you come, and you think that's where Yah is. This is why you commit so many sins, because you think, because Yah is in the church, if you do sins outside, he won't see you. That's your problem. Yah is everywhere. He was in Babylon with Abraham. He was in Arabia with Moses. Right there at the Jordan, he was with Joshua. Joshua, take off your shoes. He was in Persia with Cyrus. He was there. He was with Daniel in Babylon too. All these men, Yah spoke with them outside of the temple, outside of the church. and you're making it feel that if you don't go to that particular place, despite the fact that you see things happening in some of them that shouldn't, you still remain there saying it's Yah's church. No, it's the presence of Yah that makes a difference. And when he's gone, when his spirit is left, you have no reason being there. And Stephanos is here making the point. Verse 9, and the ancestors becoming jealous, and Joseph into Mitzrayim, but Elohim was with him. He's saying Joseph was in Egypt, but Yah was with him. There was no temple. And delivered him out of his afflictions, and gave him favor and wisdom before Pharaoh, sovereign of Mitzrayim. And he appointed him governor over Mitzrayim and all his house. So don't be fooled by people who tell you, oh, that is the right church. No, it's the right message. That's why there was a scarcity in Israel, but none in Egypt. Are you with me? The righteous people were supposed to be in Israel at the time of Joseph, but there was no food. Like today, there is a famine in the world, in the church, not for bread and water, Amos says, but for the word of Yah. Oh, yes. And so he gave this word. And he's letting them know what is happening. And the word says they were now getting agitated. Are you with me? Because, he must have spoken for about 20 minutes or half an hour here with the speech we got in. This oration, are you with me? He's speaking. And they're saying he's inciting or causing people to rebel against the authority of imperial Rome. Are you with me? Today, as we look in the world in which we live, we see men who are in sin, but they're riding on horsebacks, aren't they? And the humble princes, the servants, they're walking. That's what is happening. And so we are told that they looked at him and they were gnashing their teeth. Verse 54. Well, let's start at verse 53. Who received the Torah as it was ordained by messengers, but did not watch over it. Stephen said, you received the Torah, but you did not guard it. You did not keep what was in it. And you're talking about the temple, the temple, the temple. Stephen could easily have referred them to Jeremiah chapter 7 and verse 12, where Yah said, go now and look at Shiloh, where my name was at one time. And I destroyed it. The word says, but he being filled with the Ruach, that's Stephanos, looked steadily into the Shemayim, that's the heaven. As he's speaking, he's looking into the heavens and saw the esteem of Elohim and Yeshua standing the right hand of Yah. Did you get that? It says that as Stephen spoke and he looked in the heavens, Stephen saw Yeshua, what? Standing at the right hand of Yah. And very often as we read the scriptures, we are told Yeshua, even that when he ascended, we're told he sat at the right hand of Yah. That's what the word says. Yeshua is sitting at the right hand of Yah. But when he heard the oration of Stephanos, he, being a witness, stood before the Sanhedrin and presented his case, took it all the way historically, and looked at the historicity of Israel, how it started from Abraham, Moses, through the wilderness. When he heard that, the word said, Yeshua, stand up. It was a standing ovation. And so our topic is the ovation or the oration and ovation of Stephanos. Yeshua is always sitting at the right hand of Yah. But on this occasion, when Stephen gave his testimony, it says he stand and gave him ovation. The question is, how will we stand? What will Yah do when we give testimony? How? Why is our testimony so vague, desultory? How is it? Sometimes we'll ask a question and the answer we give is so non sequitur. It bears no resemblance to the question asked. Very non sequitur. And so, as we discussed, we're all part of the kingdom that is being built. Am I an architect in that kingdom? Am I a landscaper? Am I a curtain in the holy place or the most holy place? Am I a chair? Am I the pulpit from which the Kohen Agadal should speak? What am I? Identify yourself. Because as the records are kept, ask yourself, are you Herod dressed in silver garments, silver robe, speaking about yourself? And because you're getting the applause of men, they think you're more than you are. They say he's a god. Are you Herod? Or are you Stephen? Or are you Saul and Silas, turning the world upside down, making the world walk the right way up? Which one are you? Which one are you? Which one? Let's read on, chapter 7. And the word says, verse 57, and crying out with a loud voice, they stopped their ears and rushed upon him. They did what? They rushed upon him. Wow. And the witnesses laid down their garments at the feet of the young man named Saul. This was before Paul was converted. Paul was there at the death of Stephen, urging them on. Now, we're made to understand that the stoning back then in ancient time was not like we conceive it to be. The Mishnah describes the practice of stoning this way. When the trial is finished, the man convicted is brought out to be stoned. When 10 cubits from the place of stoning, they say to him, confess. Confess. For it is the custom of all about to be put to death to make confession, and everyone who confesses as to share in the age to come. 10 cubits from where it is. If it's in the days of the Reform, they would say 10 feet from where they're going to be burned, they would say to them, say, Kaiser Curious. Now, 4 cubits as he walks towards his death, 4 cubits from the place of stoning, the criminal is stripped. Did you hear me? The criminal is stripped. And they said the drop from the place of stoning is twice the height of the man. One of the witnesses pushes the criminal from behind so that he falls face downward. He is then turned over on his back. If he dies from the fall, that is sufficient. If not, the second witness takes the stone and drops it on his head. That's what Stephen went through. That's a stoning. Why? Because he spoke the truth. Who killed him? Other church people. Why? Because they joined their religion with the state. They said, we only have one king, and that's Caesar. But even today, you have seen how molded and shaped the church is with the state. You've seen that. Politicians come into the pulpit and they speak and they give their oratory renditions. But they're not talking about, they're talking about voting for them. So let me ask you, how many Herods are there today? Several. The church has yielded to them. They go from church to church, and the pulpit belongs to them, and they speak about politics and not Yah. What does the word say Herod did? He did not give the esteem to Yah. He did not give the kavod to Yah, and he died, and worms hate him. Whereas Stephanos gave and Yeshua stood up. He saw the face of Yeshua, and then he cried out, Father, do not let this charge be given unto them. Forgive them. Why? Because they know not what they have done. Perhaps we could say the same thing. Some of the things that we have taught from the word, and they have rejected. Feast days, people sit pretty in their home, thinking it's done away with. Forgive them because they know not what they are doing. So let's close on Revelation. Revelation chapter 22. Revelation chapter 22. And he showed me a river of water, of life, clear as crystal, no mist, no fog. Are you with me? You see, one man's clarity is another man's mist, is another man's fog. one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. Stephen to them was a terrorist, man filled with sedition, but in heaven's light, he was a freedom fighter. One man's light is another man's darkness. Many of you will recall years ago, there was prolonged conflict between the IRA and the British. To the Irish, they were freedom fighters. To the British, they were terrorists. We look to the Middle East today, and the same thing is happening. One man is a freedom fighter, yet he is perceived as a terrorist. And we will take one man to the Hague to try them. For what? Genocide. But yet, thousands of people, of bronzes, have been killed through slavery, and nobody goes to Hague for it. None. You remember that? Oh, yes. Of course, the word genocide was only coined 80 years ago. But genocide had been taking place years before that. And we sit and we say nothing. And if we do speak, we speak only of ourselves. But this morning, we don't do that. We lift up Yeshua. We give him honor. We give him praise. Because he is the one who condescended to meet us where we're at and to redeem us from our sin. He has come not to save us in our sin, but to from our sins. May we understand that we are put here to demonstrate to the world and to show them that invisible kingdom, that they can see it visible in our lives. For such we pray in Yeshua's name. Hallelujah.